Maloelele, and welcome to the Polynesian Eyes podcast, where we discuss a variety of topics from culture, history, religion, and everything around the globe through Polynesian Eyes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. All right, there we go. Welcome, Mussy. We'll start our second episode here on the William Mariner experience in Tonga in the early 1800s. We'll jump right into the video unless there's anything, Mussy, you wanna walk through.
Nope, let's roll.
Sweet, let's roll.
Introduction of the book. In the introduction of the book, it starts off with um, Captain Cook calling Tonga the Friendly Islands. He gave it that epithet when he went back because Tonga did a celebration for him, mapped out the islands, all except for Vava'u, and then he went home and called it, in England, the Friendly Islands. That's what we understand it to be. Mariner goes over there and he finds out that that wasn't the plan at all. He finds out that during the whole setup for the celebration, because Captain Cook shows up with two ships, they set up to celebrate Captain Cook's arrival and, sharing whatever they had to do on the island itself, stories and, whatever products that they brought in. And they set up this whole entire celebration with food so that they can invite Captain Cook and his company to come and eat. What Captain Cook didn't know is that that was a setup for a slaughter. Mariner found out when he got there that that was actually planned for them to be slaughtered there in Tonga. And it was supposed to be, everybody was supposed to get off the ship. They were supposed to eat and dance and sing and everything. And during that whole thing, there was supposed to be a war cry, and then they were all supposed to die. That was the original plan. The chiefs got together. Half of them didn't want it to go down. They said that there are two ships. Some of them are still on the ships. If anybody got away, they'd go back to England and call the whole country over here, and then they'd be in big trouble. Finalu Galala, in his 20s, as a general back then, said, all right, we either execute this plan right now in the middle of the day, right now, or we don't. And some of them were like, we'd better do it at night when everybody's off the ship and so on and so forth. And so they were split in that decision. Because of that, Finalu Galala said, all right, then let's just not execute this plan. If we're not all in on it 100%, then it's better that we don't execute this plan. That is the full story. They do the whole celebration. They eat, they get out there and they feed them and everything. They do the dancing and they do the fighting and the wrestling, all that. And then they send Captain Cook on his way, clueless, oblivious of what was going to happen to him that day. Anyway, so that was in 1777. Captain Cook ends up dying in Hawaii under the same sort of plan in Hawaii. The Hawaiians actually killed Captain Cook, but he got away that day. That same plan actually is the same exact plan they were wanted to use on the Port-au-Prince, which they executed. Captain Cook gets over there.
What are your thoughts? Any thoughts on that, Mussy?
To my understanding, how many times did Cook visit Tonga?
I think he came twice, at least
correct.
twice, if I remember correctly.
First time when he landed in Mua, is that correct, or is it the second time?
I can't remember the one on the Captain Cook's landing by Alaki next to
Yes,
Takamotonga.
yes, Alaki, right next to Takamotonga. Was that the first or second?
That might have been the second. I'm not sure, to
Okay,
be honest.
okay, but I think he is.
You want me to look it up? I can look it up.
Yes. Check that. And I think most of everything he's saying is the same kind of stories I've also heard. That Cook landed in close near the Hawaii Islands, and there was, he was welcomed in, and there was some plan to kind of attack him and his crew, but for some reason it didn't happen. But overall, yeah, it's kind of the same storyline that I've heard. The only question I just had was that his first or second time when he came to Tonga? Because I know there's a yes.
So it looks like he visited 3 times, 73, 74, and 77.
Okay, I know there's a rock there to um, kind of remembrance of Cook coming to Tongatapu in Alaki, but
Okay.
I'm not too sure what year he came. But yeah, that's all. I was just not too sure which time when he came to Hapai, if it was the first, second, or now it's third. But yeah, that's all my thoughts. Tua.
Yeah, I'm trying to see here. So
Keita
okay, so
Moa.
they found the actual Port au Prince
Mm,
right off of 4.
hmm, mm-hmm,
There's two things I wanted to kind of comment on. Is first off is how the most famous name for Tonga, the Friendly Islands, was based off of a false assumption. And
mm,
like we discussed earlier in the other video, the typical assumption is, oh, hey, you guys, a bunch of savages just running around, so ignorant,
mm,
and yet here they are, ignorant of what was happening around them. Yeah,
mm,
here they are. They think, oh, these people are being nice to us. They're taking care of us. When in reality, it was a setup because they wanted the metal. They wanted, all the materials that were on the ship.
materials.
And so that's the one thing that I think is interesting. The other one is it does give us some insight into the type of nature that Ulkalala had.
Mm,
He seemed to be a guy who was like strike while the opportunity is hot. And we either do it now or we don't do it at all.
mm,
And I think that will play out as you go through this whole thing. We'll see that Ulkalala is not a guy that is hesitant, right?
mm,
Once he sees the opportunity, he's the type of guy that says, "Hey, we do it now. Like the time to do it is now."
mm,
And so that's a type of leadership that he has, and he's showing it at a young age. I mean,
mm,
here at 20 years old, um, he's already taking into account. It's like telling the other chiefs, we either do it now or we don't do it at all.
mm, mm.
Um,
Good point. Good point.
yeah, and what's the other?
No, no, I was just thinking right now, Tua, like so was he wasn't installed as Ulukalala yet of the Tuihapai, I
It,
assume.
no, it sounds
Okay.
like he's very young because the title of Tuihaapai, right? It's not really a traditional title, which is why it's a self-proclaimed. It's
Correct.
really a manufactured title, um, until he got more legitimacy or even more power, right?
Mm,
And so
mm,
that is seems to be the same challenge that Tupo the First
mm,
had with Laufiritonga,
mm.
right? There was this, hey, yes, I am the Tui Kanukupolu, right? I
Yep.
have the military power, I have the political power, but in the cultural and social
Mm,
environment, he did not have, or when I say he, I mean Tupo the First, did not have ultimate influence,
correct.
right?
Correct.
And that was really Tonga, even with Tupo the First in power, Tonga was in a very, very delicate situation.
Mm,
And really, this is more, Tupo the First did some fantastic things. He did some great things. But I think the fact that Tupo the First remained in power and was able to stabilize the country is primarily, yes, it's primarily because of Tupo the First, but a big influence in that is that Laufiri Tonga did not desire chaos,
mm,
right? Laufiri Tonga
mm,
was not about, hey, I want the power. I am the
mm,
one, I have the Tuitonga blood.
mm,
Tuikanu Kupolu, you're third in line. You don't have the rights to government. And I
mm.
think it's a big testament to, as we discussed earlier, like Tupo the First was very visionary of what it
Yeah.
could be. But I think it also could be said about Laufiri Tonga because he saw the vision as well,
Mm,
right? He he
mm,
he was sitting there in a very influential and powerful position where
mm,
if he decided, you know what, we're going to challenge um Tupo the First, for the government, he could have raised an army,
mm,
right? He could
mm,
have done, but because of his vision or his catching on or seeing the future that could be for Tonga by not allowing that to happen. And I think
mm.
that's the reason why, there's stories of
The
Laufili.
Velata. You know that battle because people would go back. Wasn't that the battle that Laufili Tonga and Tubo the first kind of had in I think it was somewhere in Hawaii, Velata or something. To that
Yes.
that
And
kind of
I
I
heard
don't
there's some controversy with that, right? I don't know. I
mm,
think I was talking with Danny, I think. He's
mm,
saying that the Catholic records say that Laufili Tonga won those battles.
yeah.
But apparently from the Wesleyan church records and a lot of
Which
the
yes,
vocal history, they said
yes,
Taufahau never lost a battle his whole career,
yes.
right?
Yes, and yes, and
And
just to add to that, Laufili Tonga, the Tui Tonga was a Catholic, and Tupo the first was the Wesleyan,
the
Wesleyan faith. So
Methodist, yeah, the
Methodist,
Wesleyans,
correct.
yeah. So that there's some controversy there. Apparently, there's two, just like
Mm,
the Catholics had their own Tuitonga lines, right? Had more
mm,
Tuitongas and their own
mhm,
history. You also had
mhm,
the Wesleyans and the
mm,
the the Methodists had their own. So it's kind of interesting, the dynamics there. But really, I think the interesting thing here is to take into account is really Tonga has a lot to owe to Laufili Tonga for his willingness not to cause chaos.
yes, yeah,
And if I, from the little bit I understand, because the Tu'ikanu'Kupolu did not have a Taumafakava set,
yes.
right?
It was only Ilokava, yeah,
Yes. And
yes,
so this is a testament to Laufili Tonga's vision, and his
mm-hmm,
humility, and also his desire for the country to be stable. I think he realized as well Tonga cannot win the battles that it can, um, being divided, right? Even if we were united, we wouldn't survive. We would need to be, united with friends, which is why all the treaties were done to protect us, from the European powers, which allowed us to stay independent to this day. But I think people undervalue what Laufili Tonga brought to the table,
yes,
and really allowing Tonga to be unified, because he was the one with the most power and the most influence, um, to really disrupt what Taupaha was bringing together and consolidating.
mm,
And then also, being Catholic, the major superpowers at the time, besides England, were almost all Catholic, right? So there's some interesting things there with the French, and so forth. So
What just came to
yeah,
my mind is if Urukalala was actually, like older and maybe had more influence, like he had, when Mariner was there, he probably would have attacked Cook because it sounds like he was just a young man, didn't have too much influence, or maybe the elders didn't say, "Oh, this is just a thing," and maybe that's why the attack didn't happen. I'm just thinking now he probably didn't have because he was a young man, didn't
yeah,
have
didn't have
influence
the
yet.
influence, right?
Yeah.
Not the clout. When he's
Yes.
older, he's won all these battles.
Yeah.
He has the power, and I think you're right. It is, hey, the more mature chiefs who had more influence said, no, we're not going to do it. And Ulkalala is basically saying, if we don't do it now, I'm not interested. I'm out,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And then when Ulkalala says he's out, they were already hesitant with him
mm.
in it and more power. And then when Ulkalala bowed out, they're like, oh,
Yeah.
Tukubeya, just
Yeah.
let Captain Cook Foki and tell the world that we're the friendly islands. The one story that I did want to bring up, and I think this is really interesting, and I want to get your thoughts on it, Masi. And I can't remember. I think it was the Tuitonga of that time. Um, and I can't remember his name. The name that comes to mind is Pau, but he goes to Captain Cook, and from what I understand, Captain Cook records it that the Tuitonga was the only person out of all the people that they visited in the Pacific that they were asked this specific question. And what it was, the question was, what are you doing here? Eh? Like,
mm,
why are you here?
mm,
And Captain Cook says, out of all the islands they visited, this was the only island that asked me what I was doing there. And the story goes that he was saying, like, oh, we're here to, like, explore, map the world, and all those other things. Um, what are your thoughts on why you think that stuck out to Captain Cook, and why do you think the Tuitonga asked him that question?
Well, I think because Tonga is the oldest civilization in the Pacific, I think that that takes a lot of experience for a leader to understand how to, I don't know, ask these questions for foreign people, right? Because I think a lot of, from my understanding too, is that when especially Balangis or Caucasians would go to other Pacific islands, it was a wow factor. It was a wow factor. They were surprised and stuff. But apparently, because Tonga and because of how it was structured, there was a lot of navigation. So seeing different kind of people and interacting with different kind of people, Tongans, from my understanding, Tongans were not too surprised, especially the ones like the Tui Tonga leadership and people with high status, because they were used to meeting with non-Polynesians or people outside of the Pacific realm. That's what I'm
Mm.
thinking. That's what
Yeah.
that's what I'm thinking. Because that's because I've heard Tongans out of all the Pacific islands where we were used to engaging with non-Polynesians, and that's
Hmm.
why it didn't surprise me when you mentioned that the Tuitonga asked Cook why what was he doing there, and it was almost like a same level of understanding. So yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and it's the same thing, because like you were saying, it's so well traveled, and he understands the dangers and the
mm,
resources, right? Like, you don't just travel thousands of miles for no reason. Like,
mm,
what's the purpose here? And like you said, he understands that because he's engaging, as
mm,
a navigator of the seas. He understands the interactions with cultures. The thought that came to my mind when I read this was, as a quote unquote colonizer, why do you go and find new lands?
mm,
Right? Why did the ancient Tongans go and navigate the sea? They were looking for new land. Why were they looking for new land? For whether it's resources, whether it's for, hey, mark this island right here because it's halfway between whatever the longer distance is. Whenever we go to Hawaii, we need to stop here. This is a
correct.
good
Yeah.
place to get resources, to rest. So he understands. And then there's also the political and the military aspect of it, right? When you see someone with way more technology, right? It looks like
Mm,
they're well organized, they have resources. As a leader, you have to analyze the threat, because it is a
mm,
threat. If
mm,
if aliens showed up and they had superior technology, the
mm,
first things we would do is, what are they doing here? Are they here to kill
mm,
us? Are they here to help us? Why are they here? It is a very, like, when you think about it, like you were saying, because the Tonga is at a level
yeah.
of an expanded mind, and he understands empire building because of the history of Tonga, and
Mm,
really the building out the Polynesian Empire. These are natural questions that would arrive.
yeah.
But when you're like you're saying, when you're caught up with the wow factor on, man, their skin's white, look at the size
Yeah.
of their ship, you're not thinking at a more global level. You're just thinking of my little world
My
as
island,
a
my little island. Yes.
exactly.
My village, right? First it's like your little village, your family, then your little
Mhm.
village, then you think of your little district, then your island. And I think that was a lot of the Pacific Islands were thinking of that, and that's why they were in awe. They were in awe when any Palangis came. But I
Yeah.
think when the Tuitonga, they were not too surprised by engaging in a high level of understanding with the non-Polynesian, with the Caucasian. But yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
No, that was the other thing I wanted to bring up about Cook, is that I mean, I think like we're talking about, Tonga's independence did not happen by chance. This is not, you don't just get lucky and
Yeah.
never get colonized. You do need a little luck. You know, the offering up of Tonga in a prayer to God, that's
Yeah.
a big deal. But even
Yeah.
then, you have to do your part. So Tupo the First couldn't just say the prayer and
Yeah.
then everything works out. But I think that that's another thing that just coming to my mind having this conversation. Tonga needs to thank the Tuitongas that they did not over extend their influence and power to stop Tupo the First. Because
Mm.
even if they didn't stop Tupo the First, the destruction that would have come out of that would have given European powers the
Yes.
excuse to colonize Tonga,
Yeah.
right? If they
Yeah.
show up and there's continual civil war, there is no organized government.
Yeah.
Oh, that's all. Mother England needs to come in and say, yeah, for the betterment of the savages, to stop them from killing each other, I'm going to colonize and take over. And I think coming back to the discussion that we had earlier, Laupiri Tonga being a Tuitonga, understanding our heritage and the knowledge that had been passed down through generations of Tuitonga said, hey, yeah, I could try and be greedy for myself and try and get back power, or you know what, it's time to move forward. This is the path forward to protect my people and my family. Let's make it official. That's when he goes, sets up a taumafakava for the Tuikanuku to really say, I am blessing. Without Laufiri Tonga's blessing of Tupo the First, someone would have challenged him, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
any of Laufiri Tonga's descendants in the future could have said, you know what? My father or grandfather didn't want to claim it, but I'm going to claim it now. But he
Mm.
really put a stop to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And no, and too, and just another thing on that too. I think that Tuitonga also because it was they could have caused more chaos, or he saw a bigger vision of just what's more important of, like I said, the Tuitonga was on an understanding of what was gonna happen if they continue this road, being colonized maybe from the outsiders, or just transfer of power. And apparently, that's when the Farefa, the advisors of the Tuitonga, kind of educated the Tuikang Polo with the Taumafakava ceremony and just kind of those protocols and stuff. But yeah, pretty
Yeah.
cool.
And that's there's some interesting things there that maybe we can have dad on to talk to, but there's
Mm,
some particular things that the Farefa, when they set up the Tuikanu Kupolo's Taumafakawa, that
mm,
they specifically made some alterations so that it didn't match exactly the
like the
Tuitonga
Tuikang.
setup. So that would be an interesting, maybe in a future podcast, but we'll jump right back into it, Masi.
Yeah.
Map doesn't show Vava'u, which happens to be the biggest island because he wasn't there. He was in Ha'apai when all this happened. The Port-au-Prince also landed in Ha'apai. Vava'u happened to be the biggest island and relatively one of the most important ones, especially since export of kava back then also was important. To this day, if you ask anybody where they get the kava or what kind of kava they have, and there's different kinds. There's Fijians, there's the PNGs, there's the Ewa, there's different kinds of kava. Back then, Vava'u had the best kava. It doesn't have a bad aftertaste. It doesn't have a hangover afterwards. There's no headaches. It's the creamiest. It's the smoothest. It's the best tasting. Can use less of it and still have the same effect. So Vava'u kava, even then, was the best kind of kava. John Martin makes an
Just a comment on the kava. That's a interesting kind of background. There's two
Mm.
types of chemicals within kava. Let's see what they're called here.
Yeah. No, and that's interesting. I mean, I don't know the. I've always heard from other people saying Baba Ukava is good and it's the best. And yeah, I mean, I can't really speak much on that if it is the best and stuff. To me, I just like all kind of kava. and and I guess I haven't gotten to the level of knowing which one is from which soil, and if it's Tongatapu or Haapai or Babao. But pretty cool, pretty cool.
Yes. Let me. So there's two types of chemicals that are these of two types of these calva lactones or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
And what's unique about the Tongan kava is it's almost a 50-50 blend of the two chemicals.
Mm.
And so, like the one in Fiji, um, it's really strong and kind of giving you that kind of after effect,
Yeah.
right? But it's really bitter. And then there's another one that's more of the relaxing chemical, right?
Okay.
But it takes a higher quantity to be absorbed. So the Tongan one is a pretty good 50-50.
50.
All the other kavas are like, 80-20,
Mm.
70-30 mix between the two chemicals, which to me,
It's whatever your preference is, pretty much,
yes, it's
right?
whatever your preference, but having a 50-50 blend tries to give you the best of both worlds. And it seems to me, if we were just to think about it, it seems to be this that didn't happen by chance.
Mm.
This could have been like agriculture, of trying to find what would be the best mix, and whether the ancient Tongans got two different types and were creating a mix of their own, like a hybrid of the two. But to me, there is some room there to say that the Tongans were doing some cross pollination or cross breeding of the kava plants
Try
to
to
develop
get that
balance,
perfect. Yeah.
that
Mm.
perfect balance. Because you know I had somebody visit a couple weeks ago, and he brought over a bag of Fiji kava, right? And we had it, and it's strong, but it's also a lot more of an unpleasant experience. It's
Mm.
like he was mentioning, it's not as smooth. And granted,
Yeah.
kava can never be 100% smooth, but
Mm.
in comparison to other
Yeah.
kava types. So because I have those other bags of kava that you were talking about, and granted, it's not the vava'u kava, but it's still
Okay.
Tongan kava, right?
Cover. Mm.
And so I told him, hey, have you ever tried Tongan kava? And he's like, oh, no, not really. I just get it from the Fijians. And I said, I'm gonna bring you. It's not the best from Tonga, like I was telling him.
Mm.
Vava'u and Eu are the two preferred, but
Mm.
this is pretty good. It's because in me, I was like, dude, it's a lot smoother. It's
Yeah.
not as bitter as and earthier as the Fijian one. So I brought a bag out. We drank it, and he was like, man, this is pretty good. So I gave him two bags to go with. He shoots a text because he works with Chelsea at the
Mm.
airport. He shoots a text and goes, "Man, I really like that kava. You got any more bags?" And so we gave him another 4 or 5 bags. But like really, that just goes to show to what he's talking about. Like the Tongan kava is it's a much
Mm.
smoother experience
Yeah.
in overall.
And
So
another, and another, I think there's a reason too to that, Dua, because Tongans, it was you drink, you have kava not to get, a lot of it's not to get wasted. You having kava because you're having a long kind of exchange of words or exchange of
yep,
skills, exchange of family ties or building family. It wasn't this thing how I know that your a lot of people are thinking is to get wasted and get kava, and that's why they're going for that strong, what's gonna, or drink it daufua, or not to get all these things.
yeah.
It wasn't, kava was yes for protocols or to sustain people with titles, but also it was just a casual gathering so that you can go for a long length of time throughout the night, exchanging and kind of enjoying each other's company, and then kind of retire for the night. But yeah, I think that's another reason why it's 50-50, because the
Exactly. No, 100%.
Tongans had a purpose for it. Yeah,
Exactly. When you're taking the scenic route, you don't want to drive at 100 miles an hour.
yeah,
You want to go
yeah,
at 35, 40 miles an hour. You're moving, you're heading in a direction, but you can enjoy the scenery.
yeah,
100%. Okay, let's jump back into it, Masi.
An observation about a society would be if there was no big civilizations, to study it from a people who has none of that, who doesn't, they don't have the big governments, they don't have the big politics and policies where there's just so many things clouding a judgment of a people because they were so small. And most of them were family. It's easier to judge it from that measure, because once you get include more and more families and societies get bigger and bigger, then now you have to consider everybody's family. One thing that John Martin did recognize, though, that the good thing about the big civilizations is the fact that progress was necessary for any civilization to improve their way of life or lifestyles, or any kind of improvements that needed to be made needed to come from education and knowledge of progression. And so, along with the vocabulary and the language, I think John Martin did notice that there are things that small societies like Tonga could benefit from with the education, knowledge, and the progress. At the same time, there are things that smaller societies would be able to teach bigger ones as far as what's most important, and not have to cloud everybody's, whether it's the policy or whether it's society in general, just like the civil rights, and there's not as much crowding them or clouding their judgments when it comes to that. There's not much to, you can't hide anything, because everything is straight up and straightforward without any laws and regulations and legislations to force people to behave a certain way. Everybody just behaves as they honestly, naturally would, without any other influences from bigger societies. So John Martin meets.
Any thoughts on that, Masi?
Yeah, um, it's pretty interesting what he was sharing with the what small societies and big societies can learn from each other. Um, as a civilization like Tonga and any other civilization, it's important to evolve, and I feel like a lot of Tonga's government now, and part of avoiding colonization was taking good things. Christianity was one of that. Implementing into Tonga form of government. He did mention there was no form of government, but Tonga was already have a form of government back then. There's a Tuitonga, Farefa as advisors, and so on with Matapuris, Ho'ekis. But but yeah, I mean, and it's but yeah, both can learn from each other, and I think a lot of great civilizations are like that. You take what others do well and you take it and you kind of evolve and adapt. But yeah, I mean that's what I was just kind of thinking.
Not
Yeah,
100%. I think I understand his point,
yeah,
and like you're saying, I don't disagree. The thing that's being missed, I think, is what we mentioned in the last video.
mm,
This is Tonga in decline. This is Tonga basically fractured even down to the main island. This is not just Ha'apai and Vava'u peeling off. This is Tonga Tapu being divided. There is complete fracturing and no centralized government.
mm, yeah.
Rewind 600 years, that
Different
wasn't the
story.
case, right?
Yeah,
And Tonga,
yeah,
if you were to just take the surface area of the whole Polynesian Empire, which let's just say it's that stingray, the Polynesian Triangle, and that tail that goes into Melanesia, that would have been the largest country in the world if that empire existed today,
mm,
right?
mm,
Just in surface area. Granted, those are, you know, millions of square miles of water, right? That's a lot of it is water, but in regards to surface area, and that that is the driver behind why it collapsed, right? It got so big, it got so burdensome, and it wasn't it there were attempts to make it distributed. That's when the Inasi, the Tuitonga said,
yeah,
okay, everybody doesn't have to come from every corner of the empire. We're going to break it down into regions, right? And
mm-hmm.
then those regions will bring representatives to
To
Tonga
Tonga.
and we'll have it there. So there were some efforts to distribute out the power to facilitate um, the management of the government, but even then, it was so burdensome that like we talked about, the Tuitonga got exhausted from it. Create the Tuiha Takalawa. The Tuiha Takalawa gets exhausted from it. It leads to the Tuikanukupolu, and then all you need is poor leadership for one
Yeah.
or two or maybe three Tuitongas in a row, and then the empire just slowly collapses. And
Yeah.
so,
No, no, good point. Good point. No, and that's and I think that's probably the thing. Um, this person is not really understanding. Like you said, he's only reading it from where Mariner just started his journey, right? Because
mm,
to prove our point to that the Tuitonga's empire was so vast, there's there's thousands of was it land bounds, like
mhm,
shifting of soil and bringing rocks from Samoa or from Uvea. Like these are proof that obviously the wider population of Polynesia gathered to build these under the Tuitonga leadership and influence, because it was that's when it was the most at its peak. But yeah, I mean that's just proof of during the height of the Tuitonga influence. But yeah, this is definitely during the time chaos. Everyone is being very tribal, and it feels like it's a dysfunction society at the moment.
no, it is 100%. The centralized power
Yeah.
has been lost, and so now you have all these chiefdoms developing in place of the centralized government,
Yeah.
right? Because if the Tongans were warring the way that they were warring when William Mariner was there for hundreds of years, there'd be no more Tongans, man. Like, you have
Hmm.
enough war, you just kill people and then you run out of people, right? I mean, that's the way it goes. Like, if that was the norm, we would just run out of people.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting, and that's maybe for another discussion, but that's one of the cool things that George Vason kind of covers is how many Tongans were going to Fiji to
Mm,
study war,
mm.
right? Like, they would go there and then they would fight and they would develop war capabilities, because in Tonga there was no really war going on,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Going
know.
to Fiji, because Fiji was known to always being very tribal, and they always had wars with other set of group or of people living in another area, and that's the best way to go learn, right? To
No,
learn
100%.
your craft.
And they would go there and be extremely successful in Fiji. There are stories of when they would come back to Tonga, they would get bored,
Yeah.
right? If you're a warrior and you come back to farming,
Hmm.
you get bored. So what would
Mm,
happen? They would go create problems so that there would be war,
mm,
because that's what they wanted. That's what they had trained. That's what they had learned in Fiji. So they come back to Tonga. Fo ipe he huo he manioke
mm, mm,
mga
mm.
kumala. It's like, hey, let's go pick a fight somewhere, yeah? Get some
Mm.
entertainment.
What, they'll do it in Fiji though, huh? Because there was already stuff going on. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, interesting. Cool.
William Mariner in 1811. William Mariner is getting back from the East Indies, and he went out, for a sail. This is after Tonga, so he went out for a sail. He gets back to England, and he brings a letter to John Martin from one of his friends. And John Martin heard that he went and spent 4 years in Tonga. And Mariner told him, yeah, I was in Tonga for 4 years. And so he relays the message or the story to John Martin, in which he was extremely intrigued about it, right? Because John Martin has always wanted to know what it was like in those places, because he's written books and read books and studied that type of stuff, and asked Mariner if he can write things down as much as he can, best to his memory, as he went on his next trip, because he had to go to the West Indies this time.
Interesting thing I just wanted to bring up here, and it kind of goes back to Unga's point on the gap from the
Mm,
moment Mariner leaves Tonga to when he
yeah.
records it. So literally, because William Mariner did not record it when it happened, he's going to fall short on what he remembered.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So that's going to be a challenge. Like we was brought up on our other video, is he's running off of oral history until he writes this record.
Mm.
So it
And
would
yeah.
it would fall to certain weaknesses, and George Vason probably in the same thing, but the fact that it wasn't documented live does leave room for error.
Mm. And a young, I think we touched on the last video. He's a young boy now, and this was like for how long? How long was it when?
4.5 years in Tonga, and then a
Yes, and
couple years outside of Tonga. So
yeah, yeah.
the very beginning would have been 6.5, 7.5 years
Mm,
since he wrote it down.
mm.
So that's a lot, man. Dude, I forget what happened yesterday, let alone 7.5 years earlier.
And he told them, "All right, go to the West Indies, write everything down you remember." Mariner himself said he hasn't been in the habit of reading and writing recently, and he didn't think
Mm.
he'd have whatever it took to give justice to the story. But John Martin told him, "You go and write it down, and I'll put it in story mode." That's their whole meeting, the first time they met. John Martin also noticed that all the previous accounts, right? Because there's books and there's other voyagers that went and told stories. There's actually a story about a guy who stayed in Dongatapu, 4 years in Dongatapu, who had a story similar, had Captain Cook's story, had different voyager stories. Even the missionaries had stories about being in Donga, but none of them came close to how intimately detailed this story was, mainly because he was instructed and educated under the king himself, as a prince of the king, in the company of chiefs and other nobles, and was able to hear conversations specifically to society itself. And I know what that sounds like because
Before we go, I if he watches this, I wonder if he's read George Vason's account and
Exactly, because I was gonna.
invite him to go and read George
Yes,
Vason's. And I don't want to come across as saying William Mariner's account is not,
yeah.
as
No,
valid. No, it's valid, but we're just
it's
saying
to the
that would be a
best.
great
To the
read
best.
for him.
Yes,
It would
it's
be
to
a
the
great
best.
read for him.
Yes, it's to the best of Mariners records, and there's no fault or anything because we're just all learning because we're all learning. But George Vason's account is that, and that's our argument too with especially with Mariners. He's much more accurate. I think you mentioned it. He actually lived and married into a Tongan village or society, and also he was living in a time with the Tui Hatagalawa reign,
Mhm.
right? Which can give you much more in detail of how Tongan society functioned in those days, and that date even predates Mariner. And yeah,
Yeah.
but we don't know.
And
He and that's the funny thing too. He didn't. He said missionaries account and James Cook's, which is just like little like summaries in here and there. But yeah, he needs to check out George Vason's accounts, and that'll be a good one.
yeah, and I'm not trying to be rude to
Mm,
our brothers and sisters in Haapaya and Vava'u, but when you're in Mua and that type of exposure to the leadership and the history
mm,
that's in La Paja and in Takamotonga and in that area, Talasiu area, there's a lot of history there. And if we're gonna say exposure to the chiefs and the culture, that is where you will find the richest and the oldest and the most the most accurate description of Tongan culture and history would be amongst the Tu'ihatakalaua, who is among the Tu'itonga who are in that area. So
yeah.
yes, brother, please read George Vason. If you're watching
Mm,
this, that'd be a great read. I think you'd really enjoy it, and it'll be a great companion to the William Mariner account that you really enjoy.
actually sat in the company of guys from Mua. Now, if you know Mua,
Oh, look,
used to
it's
be
like
the capital
magical.
of Tonga before
mm-hmm.
Nuku'alofa that was. And I went to a funeral where a bunch of Mua guys were sitting and they were talking, and they were talking, they were discussing politics, and they were discussing noble things I've never really hear in any conversation because I'm from different part of the island, but it's obvious that these guys still have that type of conversations where we're speaking more of higher political stuff. And so I can only imagine the conversations and the details that Mariner was able to be previewed to, being a prince in those groups, as far as in being in the politics and the higher ups of society. So relative.
It's like,
Just to add on to it,
yeah,
everyone knows everyone knows the history within Mu'a, that and even the way people conduct and the certain knowledge. And then if you want to break it down, there's even certain families who know a lot more that lived even within those villages, and that's kind of like their duty is to hold on to these knowledge and only exercise it when called upon or when purpose comes comes to fruition, kind of thing. But yeah, yeah, that's definitely true. My short time being in Tonga, 13 years, see that a lot, especially with a lot of certain ceremonies you don't see any other villages in Mua.
no, 100%. I agree. And there's two things I want to mention about that is, for me, I didn't get involved as much of it as is Unga and Dan. I mean, all I did was rugby. That's what I really focused all my time and energy
You
on.
gotta see him. You gotta see it at least, or heard, or he was here. People,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? That's what. Because that was me. I heard people talking about this thing. I was like, oh, I'm not too sure, but I've heard it, and you've seen it from afar, or you heard family members participated in it. But yeah, that was kind of me too.
Yeah. And but you couldn't deny, because like you said, it was almost just by
Mm,
exposure, just being around it, even though I wasn't directly engaged in it. Like you're saying, it's like by osmosis. You're,
mm,
as a kid, you're just doing your kid stuff, but then you would, like you said, hear a little bit of this there, hear a little bit of that there. So that I can definitely can kind of say that's something that's important. Being at the right place with the right people goes a long way. And I think that is to go along with his point, and we'll bring Dad on to kind of give his background, but that is also what started Dad on the path
correct.
that he was on, right?
Yeah.
So because Dad was named after his grandfather, that the a lot of the people, the older gentlemen in Mu'a would invite Dad to come and bring the kava to them in
Mm-hmm.
respect to he would be what, our great grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
um or great great grandfather. That Dad was exposed to a lot of that history, and how Tonga operated, what was the historical perspective within Tonga, that when Dad came to America and he started looking at what the missionaries and what everybody else was saying, he's like, this just doesn't match with what I was told or I
And just
heard.
and just to add on to it, and it's in what foreigners were saying, but also Tongans that were not from Mu'a, right? They were
Yes.
trying their best, and that's the thing. We're not trying to discourage. They went to got their PhDs, right? They're from different parts of the island, and they're trying their best to trying to figure out what's the true history of Tonga, and it's still not hitting it because one, even though if you're Tongan but you're not from Mua, you're still it's a very close knit circle to even understand that, and that's why it's. Well, I think you mentioned it earlier that you got to be from Mua, live, have family ties to really understand and discover the true history of Tonga or Polynesia. But
No,
yeah, anyways, go
100%. 100%. There are, and even this is not a difficult concept,
yeah,
because that's the same thing in business.
yeah,
It's the same thing in sports, right? If you want to play football, you have to come to America, right? Like, that's like, if you want to be the best American football player, you ain't going to train in Australia, and you could practice all you want, but you're not going to get to that level. It's no different. Like rugby league, in my opinion, you want to play rugby league, you go to Australia. Yeah, you
NRL.
could
Yeah.
NRL. Like that is where you go. When you make it in the NRL, you can tell yourself, I can make it anywhere. And I think that's kind of to the
Yeah.
point that you're saying, and this is a thought that came to my mind because, and I've never thought about this until this conversation, Masi. How
Hmm.
much Tonga owes what we have to the last Tuitonga? I that is
Yeah.
something that's really come to my mind, and I was thinking, well, so if that's the case, why would he allow Taufa'ahau to do this? Because it is a very close knit, like you're
Mm.
saying. Well, but the reality is Taufa'ahau is from Mua.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I feel like, and Tua, and this is what I was like kind of trying to mention is, to me it's a win-win no matter what, because at the end of the day, the first Tuitonga is the younger brother of the Tui Hatagalawa, and the Tui Hatagalawa title is the younger brother of the Tuitonga. So it's still within the family. So
And
it's
that's
it's
exactly.
it's almost like the scripture stories. Sometimes the older sibling doesn't have the humility, and they kind of lose their birthright a little bit or something, goes to the younger, it could be something like that. But I think Laufiri Tonga, and I feel like maybe that's the humility that you and I probably seen a lot of Tongans. Maybe that's where it comes from, right? It doesn't just come
Nowhere.
from
Yeah.
nowhere. The right, you had people with high authority and high rank do and exercise humility, and I feel like that's probably another huge reason why Tongans have to have humility in Tongan functions and Tongan uh, family relations and stuff, because Laufiri Tonga kind of had to do it, or for the better, or it was just he that's a yeah, Loto Maulalo. He definitely had that.
No, Hunter, and that's really critical, and I'm having a greater appreciation for that in this discussion, Masi. And I think you're right because you read my mind. I think
Mm,
Lafiritonga was like, who better could I give it to?
mm,
Right? I mean, the guy is like my cousin. Like,
yeah,
they're all Tui. They
yeah,
have some Tuitonga blood and relation. So he's like, it's better with Taufa'ahau than with anyone else,
mm,
right? Because
yeah,
he does have his mother. I think it was his mother is from Mua,
mm,
and so it's like, you know what? This in a way keeps it within that knit, within that group. Granted,
mm,
it's not your standard directly from the Tuitonga, but it's
yeah,
close enough that you know what, it makes sense and it's good for the country. So let's make it happen.
nice.
So cool.
Mariner's account was perfect. He was 14 years old. John Martin noticed that he had no reason to embellish any of these stories. He was young, he was educated at a good place. He was described to have an observing mind and a retentive memory and ingenious and ingenuous about all the information, to the point where he was able to inspire confidence as he told his stories. And that's another thing that nobles do, is that they make sure, if anybody knows anything about how Matapules speak and how nobles speak, they speak with that sort of confidence. And when he told the story, he told it with that same type of confidence. And John Martin goes through the whole introduction. Basically, that's all he's doing. He's basically trying to get everybody to believe that this guy has no reason to lie. And the reason why he does that is because there's so many unbelievable things in the story itself. There's so many things that nobody would believe unless they knew that this guy had no reason. He was educated enough to know it and learn it. And all he did was tell it in a matter of fact way without making anything up. And he brings the other four witnesses to make sure that they all tell the same story and corroborate, which they all did. So
And I agree 100%. I mean, William Mariner is very credible, very, descriptive in what he was giving,
Yeah,
even though it's years apart. And then to, put the cherry on top, he has four other individuals that kind of confirm that storyline. Um,
correct.
so I mean, yeah, we agree 100% with
Yeah.
why these are positive things and why the experience that Mariner has seems authentic.
Mm,
Mariner's father, Magnus Mariner, happened to be a commander of a small battleship in the 1700s, 1776 to be exact. He actually went and sailed and fought in the American Revolution under Lord Cornwallis. And if anybody has ever watched the movie Patriot, there is an old general, basically the leader of the English army, the British army, that Mel Gibson actually has, a meeting with. He actually steals stuff from Lord Cornwallis and reads Cornwallis's book about military combat and methodical ways to run a military. And he said that Lord Cornwallis was a genius as far as it came to war and whatnot. Well, Magnus Mariner has had a ship, a little battleship, and he fought under the command of Lord Cornwallis, which I thought was an interesting thing. And then after a few losses of his ship, he sailed that ship back.
I just wanna we gotta stop right there and just say, hey, there was no the 13 colonies had no business winning that war.
Hmm.
Right? There's no business. You can't the end of the day.
Bunch of farmers, no military experience, and to me that's really required a lot of divine intervention too to create
Yeah,
fighting the most powerful empire and strongest military in the world has ever known, especially from a distance, because the 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 British Empire had the greatest naval
yeah.
military in the world. So yeah.
I know, and that was funny when he was like saying that that little warship. I was like, so you're saying that William Mariner's father was part of the fleet that showed up late that led to America winning the war? Maybe William Mariner's dad was one of the guys that Cornwallis Tafului. He's like, man, you guys showed up late. I had to surrender. But I mean, the reason why I bring it up is that is how I view how Tonga's government and
Yeah.
what we have today survived. It should not have survived. Tonga should have been colonized. There are so many ways that that should have just fallen apart, but by divine intervention, it seems to it didn't seems to it did it survived
Yeah.
down to this day. And one thing that I thought interesting, I'll just make a quick comment on. I was reading a book on Abraham Lincoln,
Yeah.
and as I was reading through it, I was like, dude, this guy is doing a lot of things similar to what Tupo the First was doing. And then I happened to just go online and search the
The dates.
timelines. Mushy. I mean, they're not exact, but they're very close. And I'm like, freeing the slaves here in America.
Give me example.
Tupo,
Like, give me the dates. Like, freeing the slaves in America. What year was that?
so 1776, so
Mm,
1886.
okay. Okay.
So I mean, they're not like centuries apart. They're like years within years or 10 years. Let's look it up right here. Um,
Yeah.
you know who I'm gonna ask?
Who?
I'm gonna
AI.
ask. Yeah, Chat GPT.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, AI. AI is getting more powerful. Just talking about AI. What do you think of AI? What does it have to be controlled, or just let AI go crazy?
I don't know, man. I don't know the answer. I mean, you definitely don't want anything to go crazy, even if it
Not go
seems
crazy,
good. Yeah.
but just go with, if you can make it more advanced, can you go? Can you want how further? The thing is how further do you want to push it? That's what I was just thinking, just out of curiosity. Tua, was if there was any the constitution, because I think Tonga has the oldest constitution in the Pacific area. The Polynesia, maybe in the southern hemisphere. I did look it up one time. Argentina and Tonga, but Emancipation Proclamation.
Move this up just a little bit so I can type better. Give a year by year. Okay.
Oh,
See, look at the years.
1860. I think he's elected as the 16th president of the United States. Look at, yeah, 1845 sent to the throne. You could say Lincoln and Tupou, and even in their respected countries too, are highly respected individuals that made a lot to what make the country is to now. Like it set the path. It set a lot of things, the path to what the country is today. So that's pretty.
Well,
Look at that.
and at a critical point, remember
Mm,
granted the United States is much younger than the Tongan civilization,
yes.
but
Yeah.
these were both at critical times. The United States is either going to die, right?
Yeah.
If the colonies split, the United States will not be what it is today. Tonga
Mm,
is the same thing. If Tonga doesn't get unification and stabilization, they're going to get colonized.
colonized.
And
Mm,
if you look at the time in which, and then Tupou the First frees all Tongans, makes them free, the emancipation.
yeah.
What does Abraham Lincoln do?
Frees the
Same thing.
slaves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
do major changes to the Constitution in freeing the slaves and all that other stuff. Tupou the First develops a constitution
Mm,
and builds that up.
yeah.
That's. I mean, I was when I was reading that book on Abraham Lincoln, I was like, dude, this is pretty dang close about the same. And
That's
then
pretty
when I
cool.
went in and when I looked at this, I was like, hmm,
That's pretty
interesting.
cool.
And all around the same time.
It just shows you to everyone is born into this world with a purpose, right?
100%.
Everyone has a purpose, big or small. Everyone has a purpose that can contribute positively if you choose to exercise on it.
Yeah. And there's a scripture that when God inspires his people, that he will whisper to kings, or the kings will hear things that were not spoken to them and see things that were not shown to them.
Mm.
And so interesting. Yeah, I just thought that would be an interesting comment there, just to kind of be like, yeah, man. When
No,
I was
that's
reading
very
this
cool.
book on Abraham Lincoln, I was like, this sounds like the Tongan Tupou the First here.
That's pretty cool.
Back to London, basically got married in London and lived there and started having children there. That's William Mariner's dad. Mariner also happens to be the second oldest of his
Oh, it's
family.
William
Second
Mariner.
oldest. So shout out to second
Mm.
oldest. I happen to be a second oldest. So shout out second oldest. Right? Something special about us. Now, born in Highbury Place, Islington, September 10th, 1791. You know how we have public schools out here? Back then in England, there were academies and people were sent to academies to go to school. So around 5, 6 years of age, Mariner was sent to a Mr. Mitchell's academy where he stayed there for the whole, 6 or 7 years. Aside from the vacations, he was educated at Mr. Mitchell's academy. And that's where he learned, arithmetic, math, geography, everything that you would learn in primary school or elementary and middle school, basically. And he was there for the 7 years, 6 or 7 years, until Mitchell died, in which he returned back home when he was 13 years old. And his dad actually had plans for him to join and start working a mariner, basically, which his mom didn't want. Neither did Mariner. But at the same time, in school, he was active. He was very adventurous. His friends would say that said that he would like to live among savages and strange occurrences, which in this case, be careful what you wish for, because it actually happens, and he's about to go for the ride of his life.
I was just about to say that. You gotta be careful what you ask for, because you
Yeah.
just might get it.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool that it looks like William Mariner from a young age had that had that thought of always wanting to experiencing kind of out of out of the crazy stuff, something that's not normal. So pretty cool.
And so the question is, was that really him, or was that him being inspired by the spirit to get yourself ready mentally? You never know.
Yeah, yeah. No, and that's all. Yeah, that's all. See, God works in mysterious ways, man.
100%.
Just like other kids, just as active in sports, amusements. He was daring. He was, just to show the personality of basically a kid growing up. also fluent at reading and writing Latin and French. So just to show the level of education he had, for it to be fitting for him to be the clerk, which he was, and to take the record he took, he had to have all this education to make it so. So instead of going off right into sailing, he goes and he becomes basically an office guy, works at the office of Mr. Harrison, who I guess was a salesman. All right, so Captain Duck, he is the captain of the Port-au-Prince. He actually served as an apprentice, his whole apprenticeship under Magnus Mariner. He comes over to take leave from Magnus Mariner himself, basically coming to basically check in before he leaves on the Port-au-Prince. The Port-au-Prince itself was 500 tons. I actually looked it up, and there were still, under its old name, it had the same numbers. It was run by 96 men. It had cannons. It had carronades. So it was a battleship. Captain Duck wanted to do is he wanted to go off and sail, and he was going to hit the West Indies and hit South America and go around. And what he called it was he was going to go cruising for prizes. That's the exact term. He was going a cruise for prizes. So whatever that means or what that meant back then, cruising for prizes meant basically going and picking up and trading and probably perhaps even taking. I don't know what it all means, but we'll be able to see throughout the story exactly what it was because some people did feel like they were low key almost pirating at some places when they did get there as far as what they did. It was a battleship, they had guns, so he was pretty confident. So he comes over to dinner.
Cruising for prizes sounds like Vikings going around. If the Vikings were to say, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" without telling every people, "We're going to go kill people and steal their stuff," the Vikings said, "We're going to go cruising for prizes."
So if there was an opportunity to gain something, we're gonna do it. Pretty much.
Exactly.
Unless you were well guarded and well protected, then we will give you a pass.
Exactly. Exactly. Like the Lord says, live by the sword, die by the sword.
Die by
These
the sword.
guys had a sword and they were willing to wield it, and they ended up dying by the sword.
Yep.
At Magnus Mariner's house and their family, and he's telling them the story and what the ship has and what it entails and what they're gonna go and do. He's telling it in an adventurous way, and he's basically telling them it's gonna be a quick trip. We're gonna go, we're gonna cruise for prizes, we're gonna do what we do, and then we're gonna come back. And as Mariner hears that story, he gets excited and he wants to join. Now he wants to join and wants to jump on the ship and go. Well, Captain Duck basically told Mariner, "Well, why don't you jump in as the clerk? You're educated, you have knowledge, you're good at reading and writing. Jump in, and I'll make you our clerk." And that's when it all starts. A few days later, Mariner's on the Port-au-Prince, and they're ready to leave England.
Like every story that a storyteller says to trick people, it's going to be quick. We're just going to go and, stop by the bank. You
Mhm.
just have to carry a gun. It's going to be quick. 30 years later in jail.
And another just and the other thing is man, even those days, a quick trip, probably if you compare it to our time, it's still a long trip. But
A quick trip is like 10 months.
yeah, that's the crazy thing about it.
Man, what a great time to be alive, man.
One thing I want to mention also in this, it wasn't going to be a speedy trip like Captain Duck was just describing it.
Hmm.
As soon as Mariner was going to leave, it was actually going to be another 7 years before he returned back to England. This is the beginning. When he gets back, even his friends didn't even recognize him to be the same person. His friends said that he used to be adventurous and he used to, be wanting to travel and do all that. But when he came back, he was sedated, right? He went from adventurous to sedation. He had a disposition, very peaceful and quiet. He didn't want to do anything. So once his age group got to his age, everybody's now finding a ship to jump on and go do things, getting married, the graduating or going to college or whatever else. Mariner was done with it. He was basically, he felt like he was basically lived a whole lifetime. And
I would say he lived multiple lifetimes, man.
Yeah.
He lived multiple lifetimes. And, it's funny. I see this in my own life as well. As you get older, the more you like your life to be boring. Eh?
Not as adventurous as
Not
when you
as
were
in
18 years old, Tua.
yeah, not even close, man. Like I have like and it's funny, the only people who are excited about war are the people who've never been to war. And then when they go to war, they're like, shit, I think I would have just liked to work on the farm all day rather than killing or being killed. And I think
Mm,
that's what a lifetime of adventure, because he lived multiple lifetimes, man. All the people he saw killed and being killed, and then experiencing a whole new culture,
mm.
traveling the world. Like he's like,
On a boat, and in those times, my goodness, just imagine how many what countries or different ethnic people he saw in the whole trip, man.
yep.
That's a whole yeah, like what you said. That's multiple lives he was living or experiences he was living, man.
That's the funny thing about life, man, is we're so eager to, in many cases, some people aren't this case, but I see it more often than not. Many are so eager to leave only to be like, just go back to where I was and just go into cruise control. I'll be pretty happy. It's funny how
Mm,
life works, man. Funny
yep.
how life works.
now he just doesn't want to do much anymore. All the adventures were done. All his friends are up and going, and now they want to become something. They're 19, 20-year-old kids, and Mariner gets back, and now he's just basically at peace. He's lived and seen enough of life in Tonga where there is nothing more adventurous, exciting in life that can bring him. He just wants to go get a nice and simple and easy job, and that you will see throughout the story why someone would turn to that disposition. But of course, that is the Tongan characteristics and personality by nature. We just want to chill now. So he comes back from.
That's a good point he brings up. I mean, I wonder how
Mm,
much of that, nature of just hanging out, chilling. I mean, it seems like the culture that maybe a mixture of both his experience, he filled his cup with adventure, but also, he's adopted that island lifestyle a little bit,
yeah,
maybe. Maybe
yeah.
that's a good point.
No, just to expand on that, that's definitely sounds like a very you know, a thing that he probably picked up in Tonga, like you mentioned, because life was more than probably getting a certain job or getting a certain whatever or working yourself to death. It was just get an easy job, right? Or get a job and just live normal. You can experience life in a different way.
Not
But yeah.
100%. 100%. You know, I agree.
From the West Indies, and he brings back. He writes everything down, and he gives it to John Martin, and he comes up with at least 400 or 500 Tongan words, right? And he gives a lot of insight to the civilization. Now they sit down. He sings songs. John Mariner brings a song interpreter, a musician, and Mariner sings songs, and he writes. This musician guy writes it down in music. John Martin gives William Mariner a dictionary. He tells him, go through this whole dictionary. If there is any phrase or word that matches any of the words in the dictionary, I want you to write it down in Tongan form so we can create a grammar type, vocabulary and a sound for it, letters, and build a whole entire vocabulary for them. And that's what he does. He sits down, he does the whole dictionary thing, and then that's where they create all the words, and they come up with upwards of about 2,000 words after this. So they're building the whole language all on their own right here. This is the first time it's ever been done, is by John Martin and William Mariner himself. Before his dictionary came out, there were no other words because Christianity doesn't show up for another 20 years, which where King Tebow actually becomes adopted by the king of England and become a protectorate of England, basically. That doesn't happen for another 20 years. So this is all fresh, all brand new, and this is the first time it happens. The reason why the missionaries got it messed up is because they just thought that they can go and kind of live around there and be okay, and think that the Tongans were going to understand what they were saying. The Tongans themselves, they didn't know that the missionaries were there to teach religion. They thought they were in Tonga because of the climate. They didn't know that they were there to teach about a god or teach about a religion, because they already had gods and religion themselves, so they didn't think anything of it. John Martin said they had to have had this vocabulary, this, for them to understand.
Just I think it'll
I got a
be
couple points.
interesting. Yeah,
Got a
go ahead,
couple
Masi.
points. So my first point. I know we touched about this. This is when you believe there was a written language, right? And this is kind of like the first time they're kind of trying to build a written language kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I was just thinking that even the whole building of the Tongan written language now that I found pretty interesting. Apparently, Danny and some of his Faikaba guys have 250 words in Tongan that's currently not in the Tongan dictionary, which is pretty
And I
crazy.
would and I would dare to say, I mean,
Pretty crazy that yeah, it was just pretty
there's
crazy.
going to
Just
be more.
there's gonna be more.
There's got to be more, because there's certain words that what was the word Dad was telling me the other day? Dad said a word, and I was
Yeah,
like, "What does that mean?"
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And he had to explain to me. I can't remember the word specifically because I forgot, but I was like, it had something to do, like it was like meant to be, or it was going to happen. That was what the word.
Mm,
It was like
mm,
foreordained. And I was like,
mm,
oh, I mean that, because there's tons of words. I guarantee you, there's tons and tons of words
yeah.
not in the dictionary.
That's what I was just thinking. That's what I was just thinking with all these words. Like even Tonga now with all it's still constructing. We don't even have it all even now because within Tongan society, not like the Tongan Faikawa guys who are a lot more function in a different way and how they've hold a lot of certain of their traditions is not included to some of the academic, which the academics are creating their own vocab, but it's not. I can guarantee you their language is not as old as those Faikawa guys that 250 words they don't know that these
Yeah,
guys know. So just with the whole constructing of Tongan language now, it's not even complete, which I find
no,
pretty funny in
and
2024.
in 1.5 generations, those 250 words will be lost,
Mm,
probably, unless
mm,
somebody goes and records them. You
yeah.
know, and I mean, even when you do have a written language, you still lose things sometimes. Like,
Mm,
I know a lot of people were not very happy with certain translations in the hymns for the church,
yeah.
that there were certain hymns that they changed the words to, whether on purpose or not, I don't know, but I know that happens. And then I've also seen some of the manuals, you know,
The
they
Book
don't
of Mormon,
say
the recent Book of Mormon translation, a lot of people didn't
notice
like the new
changes.
trend. Yeah, they didn't like the new changes from the old one. They preferred the old one because there was more correct, but we in the newer one they were using a lot of more Tonganization of words in the newer one,
Exactly.
which was off. But they were trying to be maybe they were trying to be uh PC, not to make it look so because there were certain definitions that they thought was a bit too un more unmoral or whatever. But I don't know. To me, it's
Yeah.
just weird. But yeah. So I just thought I'd just add to
Yeah,
that.
because I also noticed in a lot of the manuals and stuff, and even like other magazines, it's no longer Josefa Samita. They say
Mm.
Smiti now. I don't know. I'm like, what? What is, like you said, like the Tonglish kind of version
Yeah.
rather than the more. I mean, it's interesting, but my point is, even when you have written language, you're still losing. Like
Mm.
in a few generations, who knows who will ever say Samita anymore?
Correct. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
of the translations, it's gonna be Smiti.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
things, just because even when you have a written language, you still lose things. But when you don't have a written language, you just lose things at a much faster rate.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and another thing is, um, he said that Tonga was. He said something about adopting Tonga to England or something. He said something
Yeah,
about yeah. Um, I
not
don't.
necessarily accurate in my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah. Definitely not accurate. I'll give you I'll give you my opinion too, and you can share yours. My understanding is it was two parties agreeing to a friendly treaty that the British will just represent Tonga for external affairs with Tonga's permission, but Tonga will still govern eternally with their domestic affairs. And it was two parties coming together. It wasn't something that the UK, I mean the British will just say, We're gonna do this and adopt these things and all of that." Because no, because Tonga was not that way, and that's what
N-
makes us different and not being pretty much not never been colonized.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing is, what's being discussed, what you're discussing right there happens what Tupo the second,
Mm, yeah,
Tupo the first. That that never happens when he gets baptized under George. We're being under the King of England. That's more of just a symbolic, like, oh,
the
you
new
know
religion. Yes, yes.
yes, yes. Like England did
Christianity.
not
Yes,
have, yeah, England did not have any political power within the country.
yes.
And really, from what I remember, what drove the situation with England becoming a protectorate, which is exactly what you're saying, they represented, their job was to ensure that Tonga doesn't get colonized,
Yes.
right? And rumor has it, if I remember from some of my history classes in high school, the English saw that as an opportunity to get their foot in the door to eventually colonize Tonga, right?
Mm,
Because that's one step closer,
correct.
right? But and they made efforts to do so, but if I remember correctly, they had one major miscalculation. The constitution and the entire government was run in Tongan.
Correct.
And so the representatives from the English government, they could never know really what was going on because everything was officiated
In
in
Tongan.
Tongan.
Yeah. No, and just to add on to that, because a lot of our Polynesian neighbors, a lot of them were colonized because they had no form of government and
Mhm.
no form of, and did I think maybe military intervention occurred only two islands, Hawaii and in Maui, that there was actually warfare kind of thing. New Zealand, but most of the Polynesian islands, they come in, establish a government, create laws, right, and then it will just gradually just they'll take over because they have rules and they create policies, they create laws, and we just function that way. But yeah, and I think that's the misinterpretation of this gentleman here is Tonga was never like that. It was, and that just like what you said, and what my understanding is, two parties agreed, created this treaty, both agreed, and then of course maybe the British had an interest, like you said, and they tried to use that influence to get in, and then they find out that if they really wanted to do it, they have to learn Tongan because the Constitution was written in Tongan.
Yeah, the laws, everything was executed in Tongan. And and you're right. The easiest excuse a foreign power had to colonize a land is they're killing each other. There's no organization. We have to
Uncivilized.
civilize them. We have to
Yes,
bring
that's the
order
term.
to them, right?
Yes,
We're helping them. We're quote
yes.
unquote, by taking over,
Enlightening,
we're helping them.
enlightening them. Yes, we're
Yes.
enlightening them with enlightenment.
Yeah. I mean, hey, look at the excuse we had to get into Iraq. We're gonna build up their country. We're gonna go over there and we're gonna help the people, and then we just end up killing each
We
other, and then nothing happens.
burning billions of dollars
Exactly.
at the
Blow.
at the at the at the rate of no one wants to no one wants to talk about the inflation that's caused. Oh my
But
goodness.
I mean, but coming back, like it's really stuck in my head how critical Laufiri Tonga's choice to
Yes.
because that's all he did. I mean, all if Laufiri Tonga wanted to destroy Tupo the first, all costs, he doesn't even have to win.
Yeah.
All he has to do is cause enough chaos to give the window of opportunity for England or any other power to come in. That's how vulnerable Tupo the first was.
No.
As much
Yeah.
as everybody talks about, oh, Tupo, we do not give enough credit to Laufiri Tonga for being like, hey, you know what? I see the vision, I see
Yes.
the path forward, and I'm humble enough to say, okay, let's
Yeah.
take the path that makes sense for the country.
Yeah. No, and just to add on to that, and just to give an example to what makes Laufey Tonga's decision of, you know, not causing so much chaos and no one wins, no Tongan will win, right?
Hmm.
Because here, after been living in New Zealand for a little bit and understanding the history, Maoris were fighting against each other, and when the
Yep.
English would fight certain tribes, other tribes, let's just say the other tribes of New Zealand would not assist or do anything. They
They
wanted
want to
to. They
see
rather.
them go down.
They
Yeah,
want to see. Maybe they want to see them go down. And then what do you find out? No Maori wins, and New Zealand. It is what it is today, right? Still,
exactly.
still trying to fight, and Tonga would probably be in this exact situation if Laufiri Tonga didn't have the humility to just say, just we'll take this pathway. I see it, and his vision. I'd rather see a Tongan being than a non-Tongan, and that's you just got to do that sometimes. But yeah, I just thought I would share that. That's what I was just
No,
thinking.
I agree 100%. And to kind of emphasize the point more, Masi, I guarantee you the Catholics were urging Laufiri Tonga to fight.
Respond or keep fighting.
Yes, hey, he's got England. Well, we got France and we got Spain. We got all these other powers as well. They'll back you, and I guarantee you, not just them, but other chiefs in Tonga who were like, you know what? Who is this guy?
Yeah,
Who is he? You're the Tui Tonga. You have the rights. You have the blah blah blah. But once again, I think he also saw the big picture as well to be like, no, I understand what you guys are saying. Do I have a claim? Yes. But if I look at the bigger picture, yeah, I might win, but then England will still take over. Or even if I don't win, but I just want to get back at Tupo the first, then that's what's going to happen is I just want him to lose his power. So, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this man, I can't tell you, like, I'm getting like this really greater appreciation for Laufiri Tonga in this video, in this discussion. It's like, man,
yeah.
we underestimate what that guy provided for Tonga.
And to be honest, to when you provided that feedback of the important role of, I knew Laufey Tong was important because of his rank, but to think of that part of not causing more trouble, because of course in order to bring a family or a village or a country down, if you cause enough stir within, you're not going to protect external threats. You're always going to focus internally, and then if it's too late, then you can lose to the external threat. So, but yeah, I mean, it is pretty crazy when you were sharing that, and I was just thinking of, like the other civilizations or countries that probably went through the same thing and they didn't figure that out. But yeah,
Yeah, and just imagine what was Ma'afu's dad's name? The one that went to Lao. Is it Area Motua? Is that his name?
no,
What's the
Aremotua is the father. Oh yeah, is it the father?
Yeah,
Aremotua, yes,
that's
yes.
Ma'afu's father. That's the one who kind of that was
He
the
had the
excuse for
Tuikanu.
Tupo first to come.
Yes,
Yeah. And
yes.
look, rumor has it Tupo the first sent Ma'afu to Fiji because he was a political threat.
No,
Now, you don't think that, Masi?
no, 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 no. I'm just saying that the reason Aremotua sent Ma'afu, because usually titles in Tonga were passed from father to son, and because he had a son, Ma'afu, and he knew Taufahau was a very up and coming, because I guess not Ma'afu, yeah, Taufahau, he had fathers that were, I think it was Tupo, is it Tupo Malohi or something?
Tupo
I
Malohi, I
believe.
think is yeah.
Tupo Malohi. He had the Tui Tonga, not Tui Tonga, Tui Karupolu title, and he could have some rights, but in order to cause not to cause any clashing, he asked Ma'afu to go to Fiji. That's what my understanding, or what's.
My if I remember correctly, I thought it was Tupo the first who asked Ma'afu to go to Fiji.
Oh, okay. Well, see, I had this conversation with Danny a couple nights ago, and he gave me that version, and I was
Oh,
like, it makes sense. But
for the same
you
reason.
know,
I mean, it's the same reason.
it's
It
for the
is
same reason, to
political
not to
threat.
cause. Yes, because you didn't want a close relative, because Aremotua, his son is Ma'afu, which he should have been. Apparently, so Danny told me he had two sons, Aremotua. One was sent to Samoa, and he lived in Samoa. One was sent to Lao, which is
Mm.
Ma'afu, and became the Tui Lao. And this is the story. Sent them away. Then Taufa Hao had the title, and then we all know Taufa Hao's history. And then Queen Salote brought one of the, I forgot his name, Aremotua's son that went to Samoa, brought him back, and he was like in his 90s. Came back to
Mm.
Tonga, kind of, and then we kind of rested and died in Tonga. But that's the story. And Danny would told me it was because not to cause any chaos, because Aremotua, he was on his old he when he had the Tuikon title, he was in a very old state, and he knew there was a lot of influence from the outer islands and Hifo, that Taufahau was an up and coming leader too, and because he had his fathers being Tuikon too, not to cause any rift, sent his two sons to Samoa and Fiji, and then when he passed away, Taufahau took the title. So it was the kind of the same reason of not causing further internal, um, let's just say, chaos, so that this would have been a smooth transition. But yeah, that's the story Danny and I were just talking not too long ago, Tua. So, but yeah,
Let's ask Chat GPT.
but I think I did read about that, about Taufahau sending Ma'afu to Fiji.
Yeah, Chat GPT says Tupou the First, also known as George Tupou the First, was the first king of Tonga, ruling from 1845 until his death in 1893. He did indeed send his grandson, Siausi Tukuaho, also known as Prince Ma'afu, but it wasn't his grandson,
No, see, yeah, no, is
to Fiji.
Aremotua's
Yeah.
was Ma'afu. Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, maybe we'll have to figure that out. But my understanding was it was actually because Area Motua was Christian, right?
Mm,
He was under pressure by other chiefs, and so he asked Chupo the First to come and assist him. This is what I remember from a history
mm,
class. So that was Tupo the First's excuse to come to Tonga, right?
mm.
Was, hey, I'm coming to help my uncle, or I think Area Motua was like his uncle or whatever, to
And that was
help
during the
him.
time of the old religion believers and the new
Correct.
one, right? Correct.
Yeah.
Because I did come across stories of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And
Go ahead.
so after and then Area Motua allows Tupo the First to assume the title, to kind of help him kind of move forward, or at least take over some power. At the end of the day, when Tupo the First wins kind of the military and the political battles,
Mm,
Ma'afu is the heir and was a threat to Tupo the First, because why? He could
he has
he
claim
could
to the
take some of
throne.
the
Yeah.
support, right? And
Mm,
so the way I always understood it was Tupo the First was coming back from a trip to Australia. He stops in Fiji. He stops in Fiji on his way back to Tonga, and Takobau, I think is his name,
mm.
one of the chiefs in Fiji who claimed himself to be
Fijian king.
a Fijian king, was fighting off like two brothers or twins. I think the Rewa is what
Mm,
their names. And he was losing the battle. And there's all the Tongans that were, came over multiple battles over hundreds of years that
mm,
didn't go back to Tonga. They married, and that's the Lao people,
mm,
right? And so,
mm,
as the way I understood it was, as Tupo the First is stopping in Fiji, Takumbao asks Tupo the First to meet with him. He meets with him and he says, "Hey, look, I'm fighting a rebellion. Can you have the Tongans in the Lao group join me in my battles to fight off the rebellion?" And Tupo the First goes, "See, this is how crafty." So Tupo the First sees a opportunity here. First, he
mm,
says, "Yeah, I'll help you if you get baptized." So of course, he gets baptized, whether he's converted or not. Who cares?
mm,
All I got to do is dunk myself in the water, and you're going to give me a bunch of warriors. Dunk me, you know. So he says, if you get baptized, I will have the Lao people join you and help you fight off the rebellion. Tupo the First goes to Tonga, and then he sees the opportunity to be like, "Hey, your dad was Christian. I'm just kind of making up a story here,
mm,
as to how this could be a convincing story. I came to fight for your dad's Christian right here in America, in Tonga. There's a similar opportunity back in Fiji to have Christianity get established in Fiji. Go to Fiji, lead our people in Fiji to fight off the rebellion." And that's why Maafu goes. And then Maafu
mm,
goes, he wins, he helps Takombao win against his rebellion, the people who are rebelling against him. And then that's when, after he does that, then Maafu says, "I did my job. Now I declare war on you, Takumbao." And then
mm,
as he's beating Takumbao, supposedly, if I remember correctly, that's when Takumbao realizes he's going to lose, he does what Maafu, well, I mean, not Maafu, what Laufidi Tonga could have done, is goes to England and says, "Hey, look, I'm the real king of Fiji.
I'll seed you.
I'll give
Yeah.
you Fiji." And then that's all England needs. England's like, "Oh yeah, no problem. We have a king of Fiji saying they want us to
Mm,
civilize them and set them up." They come in, and then that's when Maafu has to concede because he can't beat the English,
mm,
right? And
mm.
then that's how England gets into Fiji, and
Well, yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, because I was gonna say, isn't and I think because of Ma'afu being in Fiji, a new title, one of the highest titles in Fiji, is the Tu'ilau, which was
yeah,
given to
yeah, because
Ma'afu. Because he controlled most of the eastern
yes,
islands of
he
Fiji.
had already battled all of that. That's why
Yeah.
that's why the Fijian chiefs ceded to England, because they're like, "We're gonna lose to Maafu eventually. We're not gonna stop him.
Mm,
We might as well try and see if we can negotiate whatever power we can with the
yeah.
English." And then
And
that's what
that's
happens.
the story of how Fiji comes under, being
Yeah.
colonized by the British. Yeah.
Yep. 100%. And so,
No, that's cool, Tua, because that's cool. You gave that account, because that's the account, I've kind of I understood, but you gave much more of a detailed version, which is pretty good. And this one I just shared. Like, this one I just barely just learned when I was just talking with Danny a couple nights ago. So yeah.
Danny was telling me a cool story that one of Maafu's what would that be? Maafu's great 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 grandson. When
Mm.
I don't know if you heard this story. When what was they had like a coup, the most recent coup, and that guy who became the prime minister for a while, I forgot his name.
Oh,
Um,
yes, 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 yes. Barama, Frank
yes,
Barama.
Vaini
Yeah, during his
Parama or
time.
something like that.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And how the one of the descendants of Maafu from the Lao group was like a general in the Fijian
Correct,
military. Did you hear the story
correct.
of how he got
Yes,
to Tonga? You remember
yes.
when
He
he was
was.
in
He was.
Tonga?
Yes, he was the one that actually didn't he seek like refuge from Tonga
Yeah,
because he was getting actually searched to get arrested in Fiji. So he
Exactly.
came. He came, which is his, a relative, kin, which is the Taufahau family. Stayed there for like I don't know many time years. And apparently, he still goes to Tonga quite often. And apparently, he is the Tu'ineao, which is another powerful
Mm.
chief that actually the Tu'ilau, when Mafu came, took over, and they kind of fought together when they were going with their campaign. And not only that, he's in that powerful position, but he's also has other, like he has a sister that's married into some other powerful chief titles, like the Vuni Valu of Bau or something. Is another powerful one. He has a relatives that's kind of over there.
So
But yeah,
pretty
it's
influential family.
yeah, pretty influential family.
So the funny story is this, Masi. So he's in that political situation, right? So he's a
Hmm.
major threat to the Barama guy or whatever his name is. And so they're trying to arrest him. And his sister would always go to Tonga, like
Mm,
the Tu'ilau. We'll just call him the Tu'ilau. I can't remember his name, but the Tu'ilau's
mm.
sister would always go to Tonga, and he never really went to Tonga. So apparently, the Tongan military picked him up from Fiji
On a boat.
on a
Eh?
boat.
Is that the one on
And
the boat?
yeah, and the excuse was we got an emergency signal, right? Like an emergency signal. So we went to go check out the emergency signal, and it was him. We picked him up, because Fiji was all really upset because hey, in order for you guys to have picked him up, you entered our waters, our territory. So it
Hmm.
was, and the Tongan the military was like, oh, no, 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 we came because there was there was an emergency signal. So that's when they picked him up and then brought him to Tonga, right? And I don't. I think the story was, or maybe there was an interview I saw because there was a time where he was getting interviewed all the time, right?
Yes,
And in
yes.
one of the discussions, or what someone had mentioned, and maybe it was Danny, that while in Tonga, he says that was, or when they picked him up from the boat, was the first time he realized I'm Tongan, right? Right? Because
Yes.
this whole time he's in Fiji and he understood, like, oh, I have Tongan blood. I'm from Laos or whatever,
Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah.
Fijian,
Yeah.
and he said he never really understood why his sister would always go back to Tonga and maintain that relationship. But he said when he got on that boat, he said, I realized it finally hit him like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm Tongan,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Now,
No, and just
granted,
no, Tua, and just to say, man, what happened if the sister didn't keep up that relationship? Going to Tonga, because that's I'm just thinking even now, because even keeping up with family relationships, man, it takes a lot of work. But when it does comes in a time when you like are grateful that you kept up those relationships and those families come and help you, or even help your family member or somebody else, man, such a blessing. And Tongans, and that's why Tongan family relationship is so important. And that's
yeah,
why his sister was doing him a huge favor, pretty much maybe saved him from many
saved
years
his
being
life.
in, saved his life, or saved many years he could have been in prison.
Yeah, not 100%. And that's the thing. Once a Tongan, always a
Always a
Tongan.
Tongan. Yep. Yep.
Let's jump into it here.
And everything that the British or any other people would want to communicate to them. So the other four guys that were with Mariner in Tonga went through similar experiences. All the ones that were corroborated Mariner's story is William Towell, Thomas Dawson, Thomas Eversfield, and of course Jeremiah Higgins. An interesting point about Mariner in Hawaii is the fact that he didn't spell Kamehameha like we know Kamehameha to be with a K, right? King Kamehameha. Well, Mariner spells it with a T, and that kind of tells you wherever the languages or the letters were changed or switched or whatever pronunciation or whatever it is, he showed up before it was Kamehameha, and that's connecting a sort of dot, which goes to show that this is we've only heard that Tonga had chiefs everywhere, or
Mm.
in different places as far as tributary and whatnot, and high chiefs. And this is an evidence of that, is because he spelled it with a T. And King Kamehameha, or Kamehameha as we know him, whichever this one was, he actually requested that Mariner stay in Hawaii and become his secretary, because that Kamehameha wanted his country to be built. He had a desire to basically civilize Hawaii. He had a desire to promote the prosperity of Hawaii and Hawaiians and build it into a big country. So he wanted Mariner to be there to be his secretary and help him do that, or accomplish that goal. Along with that is an anecdote that when
There was some.
Interesting points. So I have a question
Yes.
though, Tua.
Yeah.
So he's implying that Hawaiians before they had say Kamehameha or Tamehameha. Is there right? That's what he's kind of saying, and I feel like maybe there is some truth before. Maybe there was a shift in language because I do really feel though, and I have a strong belief that our languages and I feel like because Tonga was never colonized, it only makes sense that we probably have the closest version of the language that's probably the closest that was used back then.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of Polynesia was very close to what the Tongan language is now back then. That's what I'm just saying. And then, during the whole right, this losing influence of the Tui Tonga around the Pacific, other islands are developing their own new, you
Yeah.
know, own little. Maybe the big part is kind of they cannot share the same, but like they're changing, languages, having different practice of cultural, I don't know, practice or something. But I'm just saying, I do really feel like those days it was a lot closer to Tongan, and that was easy communication. But yeah,
No, 100%.
that's
And
what I was
and
just thinking.
because there's no written language, words change. What's
Mm,
what's the other way of saying Tonga in Samoan?
Konga,
There we go.
yeah,
Kamehameha,
Kona,
Kamehameha.
yeah,
Yeah. Like
and
so
Kona, Konga,
it's yeah, it seems like that could be a natural evolution, is confusing K's
mm,
with T's, right?
mm,
Um
mm,
and so yeah, oh, the thing I was going to mention, because I like he was mentioning uh the Tongan Empire had, governors in regions and islands, with the
mm,
capital being Tongatapu, with the capital within Tongatapu being Mu'a. I
mm,
was reading, can't remember what I was doing, and I think this is about the time I read William Mariner's and George Vason's accounts. I think I was still in college, so it probably would have been 2010-ish. I
mm,
came across a study that a Colorado State University surveyor did,
yeah,
and skimming through the article, he makes a very interesting observation slash comment, that what he did is he went and surveyed all the langis in Tonga, right? Took
mm,
survey points, surveyed it, and then he made his comment was that the langis were built at locations and in a manner that if you were to clear the majority of the vegetation, like large trees,
yeah,
it would look like you were coming into a capital city. When you're coming on the boats, coming into the lagoon,
yeah,
so you would come into the
yeah,
lagoon and then you would see these, if the majority of the vegetation weren't large trees, that they were built in a fashion that when you're coming in, you're like, okay, I am no longer in the obscure island in the middle of the Pacific. I am at the capital of the Polynesian Empire in
yeah,
Tonga. Right? So
mm,
he made an
mm.
interesting observation that if you were to clear everything, that you could see how coming into the lagoon and coming into there, and it may have been
It's
the
it,
same thing.
yeah.
It may have
It
been
made
the
it look
same.
like pyramids. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly. It's the same thing. And also probably the same thing for the Ha'amonga, right?
mm,
If you're coming in and
mm,
you see this structure, if you clear out everything, you see this big
yeah,
structure. And then coming, we discussed about the stones earlier.
mm,
There was a study about, the stone axes that
yeah,
they had back in the day. Study the ones from Samoa, like 99% of them are from Samoa. Study the ones
yeah.
in Tahiti, 99. They study the ones in Tonga, 30% are from Tahiti. 20 or 60, 40% are from
From
Samoa.
Samoa,
Boom, boom. They're from variety of different
different
islands. Because why? Where does
people travel
everything
to
go? To the capital.
Tonga.
When you were in
Yeah,
the Roman Empire, they said every road leads to Rome,
Rome. Yeah,
right?
and that, yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, there's
No, and
there's a there's a lot of little interesting hints that seems to just
yes,
be like it's a no-brainer. Besides all the other islands saying, "Oh yeah, Tonga used to come here all the time."
yes. We're giving all these facts and studies because it's hard to argue with, because it's pretty out there in your face, the significance of Tonga's empire and influence in Polynesia.
Yeah, 100%.
And I was speaking with an old Hawaiian lady, and I asked her what if there was a meaning for Kona, which is in Hawaii on the Big Island, and she said Kona means south. And so I said, okay, because Tonga means south, and the only difference between that is the fact that Kona is spelled with a K and Tonga is spelled with a T. And if that's the case, then Kamehameha at some point was spelled with a
Yeah,
T,
like
which
what we
makes
talked about.
Mariner's record line up with that. So those are the dots I'm trying to connect. Not only that, but situated on the map, all of the islands, Kona happens to be placed in the south areas. So this whole, basically the whole introduction, just like I said, John Martin getting enough proof, ample proof, with no inconsistency or contradiction to Mariner's story with all the witnesses and everything else, to make note that the portrait that we see with William Mariner, the portrait of him standing with that little spear, was somebody, one of his companions, drawing that while they were on the beach. And John Martin also makes mention that that is a very, very excellent likeness of the man himself. That's all I wanted to share here in the introduction, and we'll start getting into the book in chapter 1, and then we'll start reading between the lines and connecting the dots, both of what he went through and what we know through either oral history or just connecting the dots and reading between the lines ourselves. So until